11. Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to What You Want, and thanks for logging on. Once again, we survived the week and we arrive at Friday. But before you check yourself in the sofa for the weekend's leisure, I'm here with Niko Maldonado.
Good to be here.
And we are answering your questions. This is This Week in Watches. Okay, guys, there were some interesting debuts this week. We're starting to see more pre-Basel stuff, and I think, Niko, Stepan Sarpaneva is probably not a household name, but I think most watch enthusiasts will instinctively dig the kind of watches he makes. So from Sarpaneva Urn Fabric, the namesake, the SUF. Faline has a little graphic of the SUF. Niko, what's your thoughts about this watch? 42 millimeter steel. Does it move the needle for you?
It does. I mean, I think it's a decent look. I like the case, interesting bezel. It's something that when I looked at first, I did a double take just because it was just interesting enough to get my attention. You know, I like the markers on it too. Depending on price range, as far as when it gets into pre-owned, it's something that I would venture in myself.
And here's the nice thing about this watch. Stepan Sarpaneva builds very few watches, but he builds them to a high standard. He actually gets dials built by his fellow Finnish watchmaking colleague, Kari Voutilainen. So this watch does actually feature a Combomine cadran from Kari Voutilainen's shop, and in 42 millimeters, it features the interesting 65-hour Eterna Caliber 39 that came out in 2015. So it's not an ETA, it's not a Sellita, it's a borderline exotic movement, but from a brand, Eterna, that's bulletproof.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you know, it's something that I got to do a little bit more reading on because I want to learn more about what they're putting into those because I like cases enough to where I'm really interested in getting into the brand.
Now, the nice thing about it, though, is it's very fairly priced. You get a 65-hour Eterna Swiss-made automatic movement. You get a display case back on a 300-meter diver, which is not always the case.
Sure.
But on bump. And all of this for 3,750 euros. So you figure, if you're in the $5,000 US price range and you're looking for a dive watch, and you're looking at buying a watch that's built in hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands of copies, Sarpaneva, decent price, you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for what you're getting, it is a decent price. I think it's going to catch on, too. So I wouldn't be too surprised if it doesn't become a little bit more household.
And while Sarpaneva only makes a few hundred watches per year, please bear in mind that the 4 different dial colors of this watch, gray metallic, silver metallic, blue metallic, and brown metallic, will only be produced in 26 copies each. So this is not going to be a mass-produced timepiece. Even within the scope of Sarpaneva's production, this will be a sub-compartmented and rare piece. And he does discontinue references once he's done with them. It's not like Panerai, where special editions keep coming back in different forms.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting proposition just because it is independent horology and so affordable. So now, welcome to our global audience. Okay, we've got folks coming in from everywhere. Carrie, welcome. Ice Cold, welcome. Horology Blog, I Love Cars, Mark North, Lucian, WB601, Tom P, Matt Foster, Martin Newton, Spencer Farrow, Alexi, welcome. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Niko, maybe we should broach the whole 6 p.m. thing.
Yeah, so, you know, it's tough, guys. We want everybody to be able to watch, and, you know, one comment I already saw was good night from London. You know, we'd love to keep you up a little bit more, but if you got plans, I get it. It's tough, though, because guys in Cali, 3 o'clock, I mean, we're trying to find that optimal time, but, you know, we very much appreciate everybody being here.
Yeah, I mean, we had so many folks joining in from Europe, and it was especially the European time zones in South Africa, staying up late to watch the show. I wanted to move us back an hour and try to make it a little bit easier for you guys, and also make it a little easier for my guests who join me from the sales floor upstairs like Niko, and collectors, and we're going to have our first on the show Monday, who want to come in but maybe want to enjoy a little bit more of their Monday, Wednesday, or Friday night.
Sure.
So 6 p.m. is our new, plus Mike Michael's on Wednesday. He's old and he goes to sleep early.
Well, I hope he's not watching.
I'm just kidding. He stays up all night. He stays up later than I do. He's a party animal. The watchmaker with the tattoos and the Harley is not going to sleep before I am. Okay, guys. So questions coming in. Dimitri, Welcome. I'm so sorry I have not gotten back to you since yesterday's hectic engagements for both of us. I will be calling you this evening.
Just so everybody knows, they might be viewing the comments that say you look cute and I love you. That is my better half, so not just some crazed watch fan.
Rachel, welcome to the party. Okay, guys, so now moving on through this week's debuts. This Week in Watches includes a limited run from Moritz Grossmann of Germany, best described as Glashütte's other watchmaker. If there's Glashütte Original, which was the first to kind of set up shop after the fall of the wall, and then there was Lange, which has kind of become the ultra haute de gamme, Moritz Grossmann is best described as something like a Laurent Ferrier of Germany. They're much lower in volume than even Lange, which makes a good 5,000 watches a year. Moritz Grossmann, you're talking about 200 to 300 watches per year, run by Christina Hutter since 2008. Very small brand that makes freaking everything, and I mean everything in the watch. So now you can see the Moritz Grossmann Atom Enamel is the watch we've pictured in the picture-in-picture, and we're talking 41 millimeters in rose gold. Niko, what do you think about this watch?
Well, we've had a lot of discussions about dress watches on the show. Me and you are both enthusiasts of that exact topic. In fact, I'm wearing one of Tim's watches right now. So, which
wrist
I'll
check
show.
coming.
Oh yeah, we'll get ready for the wrist check. But you know, it's a nice size. You know, I like it over 40. You know, really nice classic case with the gold, and I absolutely love the dial. Love the white. Love the Romans. Actually, no, I'm sorry, not. Is it? No,
It is white.
Yeah. So, and the small seconds at the 6 o'clock position, ultimate in class. Definitely something you can dress up or dress down. It's something that catches my eye for sure.
At 25 pieces in white gold and rose gold, like you mentioned, Roman numerals, but on an enamel dial. Now, you've seen kind of the gloss of enamel, how it almost looks wet. Could you just maybe explain to the viewers why it's important that this is not just a painted dial, not just a galvanized dial? What does enamel bring to the table?
It brings a lot. I mean, it's something that a lot of collectors put a huge, price tag on because of the fact that it just shows craftsmanship. It shows the dedication to the brand and by the watchmakers that put it together. It really brings quality up a step.
Yeah, it's an enduring feature of a watch, and I think whenever you're talking about Glashütte watchmaking, especially when you talk about something like this watch's own caliber 100.1, you're really talking about a fusion of what was the pocket watch tradition of the pre-Soviet times, brought into a modern wristwatch paradigm. Lange does it, Glashütte Original does it, Moritz Grossmann does it, but I think it really reaches its apogee when you go back to the use of enamel, which was so prevalent during the pocket watch days, and you combine it with the caliber in particular used in this watch, which is the 3/4 bridge, the German silver, the nickel copper alloy, a pillar movement. I mean, it's a pillar movement, which is to say the plates and bridges are separated by pillars. Unless you're looking at something like the Aggie d'Or winning Fernand Barthoud chronometre, the FB1 from this past year, you're not going to see a pillar movement anywhere else. And I'd have to say that when you combine that with the snailing, the polished screws, the incredible engraving on the balance cock, the attention to detail, the chamfered slots, the screwed-in chatons holding the jewels, it's almost like with that enamel dial, now you truly feel like you are getting a pocket watch for the wrist on both sides.
Yeah, and it ties everything in. I mean, like I said, it just absolutely highlights the craftsmanship that was intended to go into the watch, and that's why we place, such an enjoyment in getting to see that on a watch, and the premium on pricing too.
Yeah, I mean it's worth the money, the premium over a conventional Moritz Grossmann Atom Pure, which is pretty much their entry-level model. But when you think about it, it's really not a ton for a watch that's built to the highest standard by hand, with hands made by hand. I mean, when you see that vaulted, beautiful, barrel-shaped, rounded profile to a watch hand, that's the difference between some sort of machine-made or stamped component and a hand that is made by an artisan, and that's what you get here. So 34,200 euros for the rose gold, and just over 35,000 for white gold without an enamel dial. That would be a shockingly fair price for what you're getting. With the enamel dial, I mean, it's almost singular. It's like you're getting something 3 times more exclusive than an FP Journe, finished to a higher standard, and priced, well, there really is no FP Journe equivalent to this.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's why you're going to see, like what I said at the start of this, stuff start catching on. People are liking the fact that there are less and less pieces made of, you know, certain brands. These are getting more and more popular. Obviously, they've made it to our platform, and we're talking about them. So, you know, I'm sure that a lot of you guys will start doing some reading on them, but I definitely see an uptick for this.
Yeah, it's an interesting watch from a really interesting brand, Moritz Grossmann. If you have not read about them, wait till the end of the show and then check them out. I think you'll be shocked by what you find. They are, if Lange is the Patek Philippe rival that people need to acknowledge, you might even say that Moritz Grossmann is in the class of, I would say they're almost like a Lang & Heine, another great German manufacturer that doesn't get nearly enough attention, but I would almost say they don't really have a Swiss equivalent with the exception of something like a Philippe Dufour or if we want to bring Finnish watchmakers in, Kari Voutilainen. They're that impressive. It's that level of finish. Okay, a question from Leo Cho, right after your Rachel sounding off. Leo's asking, guys, Vacheron Constantin Quai de Lille in steel or a Lange und Söhne Saxonia thin for an entry-level HH watch? Let me just throw in that Moritz Grossmann Atom Pure, by the way.
Thinking the same thing.
But if we exclude the star of the show tonight, we're going to keep Moritz Grossmann out of the discussion, although you shouldn't. Okay, Vacheron Constantin Quai de Lille in steel or a Lange und Söhne Saxonia thin. So different in size.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say with the Saxonia thin, I'd say if your wrist will only support that, go with that. The Vacheron Quai de Lille in steel, I'm going to be honest with you, overall feels a little less special. It's a price point watch. It's designed to open up the catalog, perhaps to people who had not considered Vacheron. And I would say that in terms of size and sensibility, it's almost like a gateway watch for the Richemont customer who's bought IWC and Panerai and wants to move into one of the snob brands.
I could buy into that. You know, for me, it's the Sax thin because of the fact that you guys have seen me so many times, you know, preaching about dress watches, about being a minimalist and liking the smaller sizes. You know, I'm just not a fan of the Vacheron. It's something that I could see, you know, somebody enjoying if you have the wrist for it, but you know, that's how I go.
Okay, so now we've got a question coming from Bob Schaff, and I guess this is maybe a cautionary tale to anyone who buys into the dream of a real micro manufacturer. Gerald Genta's post-Bulgari company, Gerald Charles, are those watches serviceable? Anything is serviceable if you have a sufficiently skilled watchmaker. Our own Mike Michaels has made pivots, screws, wheels, hinges, things that were needed for watches whose parts were long since discontinued. And if you have a watchmaker at a sufficiently high level, he could fabricate anything from plates to bridges for a conventional high horology piece. The Gerald Charles watches were distinctively Gerald Genta, but they were not, for instance, ceramic case Panerais or Tag Heuers with silicon, or Zeniths with silicon escapement components, synthetics that couldn't really be recreated or repaired artisanally. So yes, they're serviceable, but it's like when you pay studio musicians for their time, I mean, Niko, you're paying like a king's ransom, and it's almost like that.
And it is. You're absolutely right. I mean, I know that I have a vintage piece that I'm going through right now, trying to get back into shape. You know, just dealing with, you know, replacement hands, dealing with, you know, everything that goes into every part that's needed to be perfect to get it to work, and trying to keep it, you know, as authentic as possible. Mike Michaels has been a great help to me with that. But, you know, if you don't have that good of a connection, it can really drive up costs, so make sure you love it.
Yeah, so, and that's just Niko talking about a basic old Omega from the 70s.
Yeah.
That's a caliber 1020, a watch for which Omega still stocks many parts. Now, if you're talking about a Gerald Charles, or obviously many watchmakers have lost the rights to their name. Daniel Roth has lost the rights to his name. Martin Braun has lost the rights to his name. Gerald Genta wasn't a watchmaker, but he was a designer. Whenever you're looking at these micro manufacturers, you need a watchmaker of the caliber that built, regulated, or in the case of the finisseur, the artisan, you need an artisan of the caliber of the person who built the watch to service and restore the watch if it becomes a matter of parts. If it's just cleaning, oiling, and adjustment, a competent watchmaker can do that, but as soon as you need a part, you need a watchmaker, not a watch service specialist. And that's where you learn who has the bona fides. Okay, Niko, question from Giants fans. What's our impression of the polar white dial Rolex Explorer 2 versus an Omega Planet Ocean? He's purchasing a gift. He wants your views. So the 42mm Explorer 2 is the big boys that we've had with us since 2011. Planet Ocean's been around since 2005. So you'd have to say there's a big range of Planet Oceans that span a price spectrum and a size spectrum, whereas there's really only that one Rolex to compare.
Sure. First thing I'll say is Patriots won the Super Bowl. Second thing I'll say...
Sorry, Giants fan.
Second thing I'll say is, exactly like Tim said, the Planet Ocean is so vague. When I think of Planet Ocean, I think of something very large, very bulky. When I think of the Explorer 2, I think of the pinnacle of a sports watch. I think of something that's incredibly versatile, something that's thin enough to be very comfortable, and I'm a huge fan of the watch. If I get into Rolex, that'll be one of the first ones that I end up getting. I actually spoke to one of my clients today about this watch. Depending on what the gift's for, who it's for, what their motivation is going to be to wear it, what else they have, to me, I would lean Explorer 2. I think it's a great watch. I think it's the watch that tells people you're a real Rolex collector, not just the guy with the Submariner.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Love the Submariner. But it definitely says that you're the guy that's looking at Rolex the way you should.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of an off-the-beaten-path Rolex. So if you want to have a Rolex, but you don't want the one everyone has, it's a bit of the best of both worlds, where you get the prestige, the security of the name, the knowledge that service will be available forever and ever, at least with independent specialists. The bottom line is that the Rolex is a standard, whereas the Planet Ocean, I think you probably need someone who wants a Planet Ocean to choose the Planet Ocean in that case. The Rolex is one of the few Rolexes with a really interesting complication, 2 time zones. So you get some utility there that almost anyone can use. We all have friends in far-flung places. And here's the other thing. Like Niko said, it's a watch that has thinness and grace. And the Planet Ocean, even though there are now, sub 40mm sizes for the Planet Ocean, there is no thin Planet Ocean. They're all thick, they're all chunky. And unless you're in love with that specific case profile, or you have a wrist so big that even the 6-digit Explorer 2 gets lost, I would say go with the Rolex. Now, the Planet Ocean, Niko, of course, will give you more case size options. You can get a chronograph, you can get a GMT, you can get it in gold, titanium, you can get it in steel, you can get it in ceramic. So there's a lot out there. You can get it pre and post caliber 8500. Pre and post caliber 9300 chronograph, pre and post ceramic bezel, pre and post ceramic case. So for selection, you can't do any better than the Planet Ocean, but I mean, why choose from many if there's one right answer?
Exactly, and that's exactly what I was trying to say with my first answer. I mean, great, there's a lot of variety, but if you're unless you're looking for the one within that variety and that's the right answer, the vague representation of Planet Ocean versus Explorer 2, there's one right answer, and it's, to me, the Explorer 2, and I think to Tim as well.
Exactly. I think for me, it would be the black dial Explorer 2, but I would say perhaps for me there is also a titanium blue-dialed ceramic bezel Planet Ocean out there, a specific watch of which I'm now speaking that I would prefer over the Explorer 2, but that's why you have to know your subject. If you know the person's in love with, like, I don't know, a 42mm Planet Ocean in titanium, then you buy that specifically. Get them what they want. If it's just a matter of getting a great watch, go with the one that's timeless. And I think the Explorer 2 is closer to that than the Omega. So, question coming in from Dreamscape Hero Music asking, why are enamel dialed watches so expensive? And the answer is, they're coming down, but in general, supply and demand. I mean, Niko, we've talked about the process of kiln firing an enamel dial and how a large number of the dials are just candidates that wind up exploding in the kiln.
Yeah, and that's exactly why there is, somewhat of a premium on that, coming from the manufacturer. You'll notice the retail differences. So, they are coming down. They are more readily available. But, I don't think that there will ever be an equivalent between enamel and non-enamel dial. I think that it'll always have at least a percentage premium, even if it's minimal.
Yeah, and it just comes down to the fact that it's something that has to be done slowly. You still have to paint it. I mean, I don't think even Ulysse Nardin, which probably does enamel in numbers better than anyone, has moved past its enamel specialist, Donze Cadran's original methods of painting and firing the dials. And Grand Faux, which means up to 20 separate firings at 800 degrees centigrade. Grand faux means you get 20 opportunities to blow up that dial. Now what it is it's a gold base with vitreous paint applied, and the vitreous paint has ground up glass, and you fire it through several stages to bring out the richness and the depth of what is essentially melted glass on gold. So you're starting with precious metal, you're adding hand labor, you're adding many steps on top of that, and then you add many potential rejections. The paint sometimes runs in the oven. Sometimes those dials explode as they heat or cool unevenly. And ultimately, if you're going to paint on the details or the features of the enamel, as opposed to just printing on top of a white enamel base, then you're talking another step that can screw up the whole process, or simply more hand labor and time invested. And then finally, it's very hard to do enamel that is not white. There have been, shall we call them, democratized enamel dials from Chronoswiss for a few $1,000s that resell fairly cheaply. Seiko in 2016 at Baselworld came out with the Presage collection, which offers enamel dials for less than $3,000. I will say that the quality of them is not what you would expect from, say, a $30,000 enamel watch, but it is an enamel dial. But it will never come down to the point where it's the same as a galvanized dial or an enamel dial that is what they call cold enamel, simply painted on and then allowed to dry. So the bottom line is that enamel dials simply require more time and effort. That's the answer. But Ulysse Nardin coming out this year with a $28,000 Flying Tourbillon Marine, so 100-meter water resistant Grand Faux enamel dial novelty.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a couple of the pictures of the watch before. And I'm intrigued to see, how it hits the market and how people react to it. I really want to have the watch in my hands and really get a feel for it.
Guys, welcome. Guys, we're just coming in. Shout out to Roberto. Shout out to Weber Fan. Shout out to our own Eric Glass upstairs. Eric. Shout out to Phil Dix and to Matt Gosha. Guys, welcome. And Captain Zed. All right, so we've got some questions coming in. I would say the question that has been on many lips, and I've received emails to this effect, is bronze played out?
Yeah, I think that we pretty much agree on opinion here. I mean, there was a craze for a little bit. I never understood it. I'm not one to love bronze on a watch. I mean, there's a few exceptions, a few watches that, sport bronze bezels or something like that. AP has a good couple limited editions like that, but that was pre-bronze craze. So, I would agree and say yes that it is, if that is Tim's opinion. But I don't see the thrill of it. I don't see the drive. I think it was just one of those fads that you are going to from now on have to get the right buyer for.
I would say this. We've come a long way since 2011. The PAM 382, the original Bronzo, 1,000 pieces. That thing hit the watch scene like a Tomahawk missile, loaded with weapons-grade uranium. The bottom line is that it was a huge hit, and it was so influential that every other brand, right down to Citizen in the sub-$200 range, scrambled to copy it. It was so successful that Panerai copied itself, not once, but twice. First with the 507 back in 2013, so there's another 1,000 Bronzos, now with the Power Reserve, and also this year's 671 with the blue dial. But it's a blue dial.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there will be exceptions. I think that Panerai hit a home run with that. Obviously, you see OJ on every week with his Bronzo, so there will be watches that will always be successful and and have that drive to be collected. That may be one of them, but as far as on the whole, I do think it's on its way out.
I think we're well into the realm of Me Too watches, because here's the thing with bronze. I'd say there are maybe 5 truly cool bronze watches on the market right now. The 3 Panerai watches are still holding up. I don't see people saying, well, you know what, I've lost interest in my 382 because of the 671. It may be that 3,000 is still below the market carrying capacity for Panerai Bronzos. We'll find out. But I would say those are 3 of the cool bronze watches on the market right now. The other is the Tudor Heritage Blancpain bronze. We've seen a huge response to that, and I think they got it right to make it a little bit bigger and a little bit louder. But one thing I've noticed, Niko, is that the Panerai watches seem to be treated to patina, or maybe I should say not treated, to patina quickly, whereas the first of those bronze Tudors we saw from a year ago, even on the wrist every day on guys with horrible hygiene, they still look new.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the drive is there, but I'm a fan of the Tudor bronze. I've seen it. It's not something I would put my own money out there for, but it's something that is intriguing enough, and they've done some great marketing campaigns on. But that may be one of the last home runs for them in that line. Yeah, just like I said, on a whole, not thrilled, but I do have to admit that I like that watch.
It's cool, and I'll say this. I'm not a fan of it, but it has not lost its appeal. Talking to people, and I've got to go beyond my own perspective, and I've got to talk to other collectors to get a sense of a watch that doesn't personally interest me. Sure. I don't sense any diminution in interest in that Tudor, even though we're coming up on 1 year past and the market's flooded with bronze watches from IWC, from Zenith, from Citizen, everyone. The fifth bronze watch of the moment that I think is still really worthwhile, and I think Panerai saw this last year at Basel, and they're like, okay, give us one more bronze watch. It's the Oris Carl Brashear. The Oris Carl Brashear really nailed it. With the blue dial and the bronze case, I think they found a different way of expressing bronze and picked up a chunk of the market that had not yet been claimed by anyone else's aesthetic. And I think that was perhaps the last cool bronze watch to debut.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could agree with that theory, but I mean, I still stand in the same place.
Okay, so we have a question from Edmund Choi about 38mm watch options, saying he wishes there were more. And I get a lot of questions about watches of a certain type within a certain price range. And we were talking a bit about that sub $3,000 chronograph that people have been asking us about. Mm-hmm. And two of the options are 38mm. Could you talk a little bit about what you brought up when I broached this question?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the first brand that came to mind was Omega, and because I wear a 38mm Grand is vintage Omega that we've talked about now that I'm struggling to service. But anyway, the Speedmaster Reduced came up, and for me, that's a great watch. You know, again, we'll do a wrist check right now with let me see, the macro. Let's see. So there's Tim's white gold reverso day and night, and to me, this watch fits me perfectly. But generally, I'll wear a 38. So to see our day side. But anyway, back to the subject at hand. That watch fits me optimally. I think that the one problem people have with getting under that price range is size. People are liking bigger sizes now, so you have to put more money out to get those. So, with the Speedmaster Reduced, I would wear that watch all day long because it's the right size. So under $3,000, you are going to struggle with getting over 40mm, but there's a lot of great options.
The other thing that's interesting is there are some, shall we say, late 80s Ebel 1911 El Primeros still kicking around out there for under $3,000. If you like the 1911 chronograph style and you're not afraid to go two-tone, those are still available below $3,000, and they're nicely sized at about 40mm. But in the 38mm range, since we're still talking about that sub $3,000 chronograph, that's a great value and doesn't force you to compromise on pedigree or provenance. I would say the Girard-Perregaux stainless steel or titanium, reference 8020. You remember the Ferrari branded watches from this reference. Black, gray, red, white, yellow, many different dials, and again, tie or stainless steel, 38mm, Girard-Perregaux. You're basically using the same movement that's in the Speedmaster Reduced, but you're getting it in a package that's a little bit more elegant in shape and substance.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm a GP fan. I haven't really talked too much about it on the show, but there's a couple of models out there that I really like, and I think that they're very underrated. It's great to get into them, especially pre-owned, because if you guys look at the site, you'll notice 40, 50, 60% off of retail. So definitely a lot of great options coming out of that brand.
Another thing that's worth mentioning, because Niko, you mentioned that there are some who like the 38 idea, but not the reality of a small watch on a big wrist. Mm-hmm. And we talked about maybe a sub $3,000 option that's a little bit beefier. And we talked about a watch that really isn't well known to Americans, because the Tudor Hydronaut 2 chronograph, 42mm in stainless steel, came out in a period when Tudor was not actively being sold in the US. But 42mm dive watch, actually we're still talking about that same ETA modular chronograph in the other two watches. A little bit more aggressive, you think?
A little bit. You're probably going to get to the upper end of the spectrum on that watch, but a great wearer. It's going to have a little bit more size to it. Like Tim said, it's going to have that beefy feel. It really depends on the buyer. I mean, if that is your motive and it's 3,000 for a chronograph, you're going bigger, you're going to limit your options. Going under 3,000 already limits your options. You always have to look at it that way. So, but yeah, another great option.
Yeah, I would say never buy a new watch under $3,000 if you want a luxury product. Buy something pre-owned that was originally, $6,000 or $7,000, or even just $4,000 or $5,000, because there does start to become a big price and quality delta between $2,000-$3,000 for a new timepiece and $5,000-$6,000-$7,000. I mean, you go from a timepiece that may be powered by a low-grade ETA caliber or a Sellita to something that may be powered by a chronometer-grade ETA caliber, or even a Rolex 3135. When you look at a watch that's pre-owned in that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range versus buying something new off the shelf. And if you're looking in that sub $3,000 range, you want to look for I would say a pre-owned watch from a good solid brand to know that parts and service will always be available, and you know that there is a lower limit to the quality of the movement that'll go into one of those watches.
Sure.
So I would also like to give a quick shout out to our friends online who are asking questions along the lines of Phil Dix's comment: is a new Red Sea Dweller possible at Baselworld? Anything's possible, but I'll say this. I feel like Rolex is more apt to do that sort of a treatment, an explicitly vintage-styled watch on the Tudor line rather than Rolex. I almost want to say that they are reluctant to do a retro watch in the Rolex house.
Yeah, I forget who I was watching, but somebody did I think it was a forum they released a mock draw-up of what that might look like, and I'm very intrigued. I hope we see something like that. I kind of agree with Tim. I don't think they're likely to, but do I think so in the future, or that it will come down the road? Yeah, and I'm very hopeful that it does.
Question coming in from Horology Blog: will JLC ever make a dress watch with a non-blued steel seconds hand? Much nicer if they had matching hands. Honestly, they're out there. When you're talking about a brand that's got watches spanning the 1840s to the present, you're going to find just about anything ever made. Anything you could ever imagine, except for a minute repeating, what was I going to say? A minute repeating wristwatch during like the 50s, 60s, 70s. They just didn't do that. And they've never ever done a wristwatch split seconds chronograph. They've done it in the pocket watch format. Of course, today you can get almost anything, including a minute repeating wristwatch from JLC. But if you just don't like the blued steel seconds hand, look around. They're out there, including from the 90s. Okay, so question coming through. Do we think Rolex continues making the Hulk, the all-green sub, going forward?
Well, that's interesting. I was talking to one of the other sales associates today about how long Rolex will continue to make a different model, not this one, but, we talked about the discontinuation of another model that was very popular, and it was 10 years. And we were talking about the Batman today and how much longer we would think that it would keep going. I don't see any reason for Rolex to discontinue either of those models, whether it be the Hulk or the Batman. They are brutally popular right now. As you guys know, they're trading at basically retail or a little bit above at the moment, depending on where you're buying from. So, I don't see any reason, but I mean, the time comes for everything.
I would say probably not. I don't think they're going to discontinue it, and here's why. Remember that the whole green sub thing pretty much started in 2003 with the LV, the Lunette Vert, the green bezel anniversary Submariner. So the 50th anniversary Submariner came out with the green bezel, and it continued in production year after year after year, right up until the 2010 debut of the Hulk. So the Hulk just took over the catalog slot formerly occupied by the green bezel anniversary sub, which had been in production for the better part of a decade. If they weren't going to discontinue the original LV with the green bezel after the anniversary had passed, I don't see why they would discontinue the Hulk. I think they've decided that there's a permanent market for a sub that plays to a crowd whose blood bleeds green, the Rolex diehards, and they want something that's a little bit different, and they don't want to have to pay for the white gold or full yellow gold Submariners to get that something that's different.
Yeah, totally agreed. And looking at the comments here, I see our good friend Peter Winecoop just giving a shout out. How you doing, bud?
Peter, welcome. Asking Tim, do you consider Blancpain high horology? Yes, and here's why. First of all, they were a legit high horology brand when they were resurrected by Jean-Claude Biver, and his colleague, Mr. Piguet, I think it was, I want to say Jean-Jacques Piguet of Frédéric Piguet during the 1980s. The fact that they were making mechanical watches back then already made them high horology because the standards were low in the immediate aftermath of the quartz crisis. During the 90s, under the ownership of Omega, with Biver still in the background as an exec at Omega, they made watches that were legitimately high horology by the standards of the 90s. So nicely finished, upscale movements, not just powered with a bunch of ETAs. We saw some peso calibers finished to exceptionally high chronometer standards. Frédéric Piguet. We saw the introduction during the 2000s of movements designed by Frédéric Piguet exclusively for Blancpain, and gradually the Piguet manufacture was folded into Blancpain and it became manufactured Blancpain. So if you look at the quality of movements like the 13RO, the 1315 that's in the 50 fathoms and the 50 fathoms bathyscaphe, the new F385 caliber, the flyback high rate Frédéric Piguet automatic chronograph movement that's in the bathyscaphe chronograph, I gotta say that everything you would expect, dial finish, case finish, movement finish, technical spec, it all lines up. Plus, Niko, we were just talking about enamels. You can get enamel dials. You can get engraved watches. You can get gem set watches, hand gem set watches at the highest level. There's really nothing you would want, including engraved movements. I mean, you can get engraved and skeletonized movements. So yes, Blancpain is high horology, but Niko, how does the market treat them from a resale value?
It treats them relatively well, and like Eric Glass from upstairs said, the 50 Fathom is one of the favorites of all time. And like I reiterate almost always on every episode, I'm a minimalist. I love classic watches. I love something that's dressy. That is one watch that takes me way out of my comfort zone, and I absolutely love. We had the Aqualung in recently, and I love that watch with a passion. Sold it to a good client of mine, and it's one of those watches that I would absolutely love to wear, love to own. I think their presentation is fantastic in the 50 Fathoms, and you know, it's something that's not going to go away. Craftsmanship is beautiful, and the quality is just something you can feel.
Also, in the 50 Fathoms family, since the rollout of the silicone hairsprings, we've begun to see display casebacks even on the standard 50 Fathoms diver. So I would say that realistically, that maybe the last hurdle to feeling like high horology in the dive watch segment, being able to see a high-grade movement, that veil has been removed. Just be aware, with Blancpain, there's the 50 Fathoms and there's everything else. And the everything else arguably gives them a greater claim to high horology because that's where you see the carousel tourbillon watches. That's where you see the engraved movements. That's where you see the enamel dials. But those watches tend to suffer more of a drop-off in value when purchased new versus the 50 Fathoms, which is their royal oak. In as much as there's that iconic 50 Fathoms, the model we call the 5015, and then there are many derivatives of it that open up the field to everything from gold to complications. But I mean, Niko, I think you agree from a buyer's perspective, there's the 50 Fathoms, the way we look at it economically, and then there's everything else.
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Also worth mentioning, the L Evolution line, probably the one to avoid if you're worried about resale value. I've had people who were big time at Blancpain just tell me that internally they had to keep a smile for the public's sake, but they realized that that could have been done better, and maybe a Lamborghini for the wrist is more Richard Mille than Blancpain.
Yeah, I've seen it before. I'd probably have to agree with that statement. You know, the safest bet on those are the Baselworld and obviously the 50 Fathoms. You know, bread and butter. And there's not too many, you know, watches within the brand that I'm absolutely in love with, and those are two of them.
Now we have a question coming out from Jesse Matson. Is any idea why the price of gold watches has not gone down with the market price of gold? $800 less per ounce isn't a small number when you're talking about the weight of something like a solid gold sub. Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, there was a big readjustment a few years back, and across the board, I would say that took place between 2011 and 2013 after the bloodletting, following the letdown from the financial crisis, when people finally started moving assets away from gold and into equities, real estate. They started moving out of the most secure securities with the exception of government bonds. So gold had its letdown right after the financial crisis. 8, 9, and 10 2011, we started seeing people flee in gold, and the watch industry did start to reprice. The problem is the way factories buy gold, oftentimes they stockpile it. They think they're hedging against the future, but if they buy high and then they have to eat through that reserve going forward, and this goes for the specialist case makers too, a lot of times they're pricing their product according to a commodity price from 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with all that, but what I get a question a lot from people that are, maybe they're looking for help trying to sell a vintage watch, and it's something that, I'll tell them is sub $1,000, just because it's an off-brand, has a good amount of gold in it, but just not something incredibly desirable or looked for, and they ask me the exact question, but wait a second, it's all gold. Well, when I price a watch, when we're selling a watch, whether it's an all-gold Jaeger or Rolex or whatever it is, I'm pricing a watch based on what the watch is, what the watchmaking that goes into that watch delivers, and what it's worth. So to me, prices are gold, and I'm sure to the manufacturers, obviously will play an effect, but not something that I'm prioritizing when looking at watch value.
Now Peter's also asking, thinking about the Blancpain Villeray 6606 watch one has available. Blancpain Villeray models are an excellent buy because when bought pre-owned, you're basically getting a high horology watch at almost like an Omega Breitling type price. Great watches, beautifully made. I have to say that you will not be disappointed on that front. So jumping forward, other questions coming through. This is one from, so what color of the bezel will the 50th anniversary Sea Dweller be? Are we doing the over-under on this? I don't know. This is from Carrie. What do you think, Niko?
Total toss-up. I mean, I really don't know. I don't even want to speculate because it's just something that I just am excited for and I want to see. But I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I wish we had inside information like that.
Yeah, realistically, I don't think Rolex is going to do something that crazy with the watch. A colored bezel on a Sea Dweller, that would be, I mean, that would be like Margaret Thatcher wearing like a Joker wig. I mean, that's so jarring. I don't quite know how to address it. I'm just saying, bless her soul and all, but it just seems jarring, and I don't know, maybe Rolex wants to go a little bit audacious. We saw with the Z Blue Milgauss a few years back in 2014, a little bit of zaniness with last year's Sky Dweller, excuse me, not Sky Dweller, Air King. That dial, the 116900 was a little bit crazy in the spirit of the Milgauss. Rolex has got a wacky streak, so it could happen, but my guess, color of the bezel on the 50th anniversary Sea Dweller is still black. Okay, so moving forward, what kind of accuracy, this is from Ben is Good, he's asking, what kind of accuracy should I expect buying a vintage Rolex that has been serviced? For example, a Datejust from the 80s. A Datejust from the 80s is not so mechanically different from a Datejust of today that it shouldn't be able to keep chronometer spec time, except nothing less. I would say if you're buying one and it says superlative chronometer on the dial, it may not meet Rolex's current superlative chronometer standard of ±2, but it should be able to run chronometer time. Okay, so moving forward, Niko, I've got a new watch debut from Zenith, and Faylene has a graphic here. This is the Zenith Heritage Pilot Extra Special Chronograph in bronze. So now, we were saying earlier that we thought bronze may have jumped the shark. This is not Zenith's first foray into the world of bronze. They had their first Pilot Extra Special in 2015. But what do you think specifically of this one being a chronograph with an olive drab, oily nubuck leather strap?
I mean, I'm not out here to really talk down, and I know I'll get a lot of comments after shows about, man, you're brutal, or whatever it is, like when I did the diamonds comment with Tim on a beautiful watch notably. But I mean, if I had to compare that watch to one, I mean, if I look at that on somebody's wrist, I think Hamilton. I mean, I'm thinking Jazzmaster, just all the way. I cannot stand it. It's like the opinion I've expressed before on the Piaget Polo S. I don't want you coming up to me asking me if it's something else, especially when it's not the better of the two.
Fair enough. Okay, so I will say there is a wild card in this. He's talking about the two bronze Zeniths. We had the Pilot Extra Special, and we have the Pilot Extra Special chronograph. There was a West Time limited edition with a blue dial that I feel is the winner in the Zenith bronze watch sweepstakes. So look that one up. Definitely worth a look if you're thinking about this watch. Now this is something that just came to me this morning in a press kit from Zenith, so I'm not going to badmouth it because there's someone out there who's going to see this and think, oh, that's my watch. But for me, this is a Me Too watch that's a little bit too late.
I didn't get the press kit, so that's why I give my opinion.
I'm sorry. Zenith might not love me anymore after I say that. Zenith, I think this is awesome. This is the best thing ever. Keep sending me preview stuff.
Oh, we're digging holes.
Okay, Fabi Schwartz is asking, Tim, what do you think of the Corum Admiral's Cup Tides, taking the moon phase complication and making something useful out of it? Yes, since the early 90s, Corum has built an interesting in-house complications, one of the few in-house watchmaking feats that they've mustered over the years that wasn't farmed out to a movement manufacturer or some expression of the Corum bridge.
Sure.
Now this is great because, I mean, if you're a fisherman, I think you are,
I am.
or if you're a boater,
I am.
then knowing the strength and height of the tides at what time is actually pretty useful. I will say I like it. It's cool. It's often contained, however, in watches that are a little bit too big and stylistically jarring for me. But if you like the Corum Admiral's Cup, you're going to find one that you like with the tides complication. Yeah, this is something Corum's built since I want to say about 1994. I like it. It's useful. I just find that the packaging around it is big and bulbous.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And again, I do a lot of boating, especially with us here in South Florida, and I don't own a single watch durable enough to withstand, you know, the slamming that a boat, you know, takes on 5-foot waves. If I've got hands on the wheel and that movement's getting jarred like that every so often, I don't own a single watch that I would wear on the boat. I'm not sure how that would stand up. I've seen the watch. I like the function, but it's one of those things that I'm just, you know, not overly enthused about.
Okay, so questions coming in from JBO Surf, who's asking, what year did Rolex go from hollow to solid bracelets? The true and most honest answer there, it was a transitional period. The Sea Dweller actually went to solid end links very early. I mean, I would even say go back to the 1980s and the Sea Dweller and, you know, the President bracelet on the Date. There were solid end link bracelets fairly early on upscale divers and dress watches, but the solid center links of the bracelet, if we're talking about the Oyster, really only became phased in throughout the line during the 2000s. And I will say that I believe there's still a 5-digit two-tone Yachtmaster that in the last year or so was still sold with hollow center links. The two-tone Yachtmaster, I want to say it was the yellow gold and steel, was, I believe, the last Rolex to transition over to the solid end links, and I'm not even sure it's out of the catalog. So it was a period of transition from the earliest to go over to a full solid link bracelet, which would have been, I want to say, the 2005, if we're talking about the Oyster bracelets, the 2005 GMT anniversary with the ceramic bezel and the super case, that had solid end links, solid center links, and the milled out clasp. And in general, I'm going to use this as a rule of thumb, as the Oyster cased watches went over to 6-digit references during the 2000s, each successive introduction of a 6-digit reference was paired with a new bracelet that featured minimally solid end links, solid center links if it was an Oyster, and a milled out clasp that was no longer stamped. So it's something that could probably and honestly be called a transitional process, principally occupying the 2000s and the early 2010s. And the last Submariner with, I believe, solid end links and hollow center links and a stamped clasp. I want to say that would have been the 14060 in 2011. That was the end of that. Okay. So this is for Tim and Niko from Austin Jones. What would you say is the chronograph that offers the most value from a high horology brand? So we're not fixed to a price here, Niko, but we're talking about value from a high horology brand. Rolex, I'm sorry, you're off the table. Omega, Toodaloo, Breitling. Don't even ask.
Yeah, it's still vague though. I mean, you know, I would love to, if you limited it to 5 and I had to pick, that'd be great. But I mean, Some of my favorite chronographs, IWC. I love a lot of the IWC chronos. Let's see, Blancpain.
A 50 fathoms flyback chronograph.
Yeah, flyback is key. I mean, it's one of those that is absolutely timeless. So those would probably be my two to keep it within a relative,
Okay.
Reasonable price point. I would probably take those two brands.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to buy a Blancpain and you want to buy for value, get a 50 fathoms. You're going to lose less on that than anything else. And if you want a chronograph in the Blancpain catalog and you plan to buy new or buy boutique or buy anywhere near retail, yeah, you're going to want to get a 50 fathoms, and if you must have a chronograph, the 50 fathoms flyback is a wonderful choice. But so is the bathyscaphe chronograph in that 50 fathoms family, and with the newer, more modern movement. I would say that for pure value, Niko, you've seen Patek Philippe 5980 Nautilus chronographs,
Of course.
come and go through our offices. Those are remarkably stout in terms of holding their value, but still giving you a Patek Philippe experience. You don't feel like you're getting a machine-made watch.
Oh no, absolutely. I was kind of trying to keep it in more of a relative to the, not to say it's every day because it's still very expensive, but not to keep it, too low. But absolutely, fantastic for holding value. Most of Patek is. I know there was a question recently about a certain Patek selling at the moment, but that's a fantastic watch. If you have the means to get into that, of course, I'll take that chronograph, every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Okay, so a question coming from Ricky Chan. With the new Patek Philippe 5230G World Time, how long from now do you think is the best time to sell the 5130 white gold? I would say, Niko, give me your take on this, and then I'll make my guess.
If I could predict watch markets, we would be a much bigger company. I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of time that you could say, in general, how long to wait before the hype of the newer edition, comes out and, then go to sell again. It really all depends on the popularity right now. I haven't done a whole lot of digging into the 5230. I've seen it. But I haven't heard that much buzz. It may be still an okay time to sell now, but check markets. Check, you can go back on forums and on eBay or Chrono24.
eBay sold listings.
Yeah, eBay
especially.
sold listings especially, and check what the watch sold for pre-release and where it's going for now. A lot of different ways you can check that.
I would say, Ricky, realistically, the watch market is so depressed right now that this is not a great time to sell. We're still within 1 year of the release of the 5230, so the honeymoon period continues. Patek Philippe has rolled it out fairly slow, so it's not like there's a surfeit of them on the market. Right now, I would say that it still has a newness buzz. While it's still a new watch and there are still dealer waiting lists, and while the watch market is still depressed on both the new and the pre-owned side, hang on to your 5130G. I believe that the time for a watch market that is universally strong, pre-owned and new, will be a rising tide that lifts all boats. And I also believe it's probably going to be 2 or 3 years down the line from now. So consider that to be the time to sell a 5130G, because right now you'd be selling into a market that's glutted and in which its successor model is still new, hot, and has buzz. And that's a perfect storm for selling, not for the max, but for the minimum.
But still keep in mind, depending on how long you've had it and how long you're going to wait, keep in mind service costs too. What do you have to gain from getting past the time where it needs to be serviced, losing the watch for however long it takes to get back from Patek, and also your costs going to be attributed to that. So keep all those things in mind.
Okay, so also remember, guys, vintage is a world unto itself, and I have 2 questions on vintage from Phil Dix and from Fabi Schwartz. And Phil Dix is asking, Niko, if you buy a vintage Rolex, will the resale price decrease if you wear it? Let's say you wear it carefully and you don't physically change the watch.
Sure, no, not at all. It's not like, an old comic book or baseball card, don't get a fingerprint on it. You know what I mean? It's you can absolutely wear them. If you have something that has some value, 5512, 5513 Rolex, something like that, all original from the time period, feel free to wear the watch. Rolex can still service that. We talked about Datejust, and having, current production parts still available. Get with the right watchmaker. Make sure that before you decide to wear that watch that it is good to be worn. If you get all that stuff in check, it's, like buying a vintage car. Just take care of it, show it off at the shows, drive it once a week, and, enjoy it while you have it.
I agree with Niko, and remember, watches don't have an odometer. Unlike a car, a watch is designed to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week over multiple lifetimes. And here's the thing, unless you buy a vintage watch that is literally not so much a time capsule watch, but like a watch that came out of a time machine. Like it didn't age the 30 years between, even sitting in a drawer, things will age, accessories will age, a watch will age, a dial will age. If you find something whose sole selling point is that it's so incredibly virgin fresh that wearing it would somehow remove a status that cannot otherwise be conferred on a watch, something that you only buy because it's never been worn, and it's literally that perfect, maybe that's a watch that you buy to put on display. There are rare cases where a watch is so perfect that you could never recreate it if you wore it. Most vintage Rolexes are nothing like that. They're mostly stainless steel watches. They're mostly utility watches. They've mostly been worn. Their bracelets are mostly stretched a little bit. Their cases have usually been refinished once, twice, thrice. They've been opened and serviced. When there's any evidence that the watch has been worn, then you're not looking at some sort of public trust where you must preserve this thing for posterity. Now you're looking at a pre-owned watch that happens to be vintage. Wear it delicately, wear it with sensitivity to what it is. Don't alter it. Don't put a dent in it. Don't do something that requires the dial to be refinished or replaced. But you can wear that watch in good conscience and still sell it for what you paid for it, assuming you bought it right. Now, here's that dangerous question that comes up about vintage dials. And for Panerai, with a dive watch, 2004 and a tritium dial is vintage. Why would you not want to send that watch for factory service, Niko?
Factory dial come back.
Yeah.
That's the exact reason, and you see it a lot with even Rolex, vintage Rolexes. If you send that watch to Panerai, you can say, do not replace the dial. You can say whatever you want to, but best of luck. That's the one reason that you don't want to do that.
Yeah, you got to watch out, because even if you request it, factory instinct and MO is to replace the dial. I've seen it happen many times with Panerai, even though by this stage in the game, all watchmakers should understand that a tritium dial comes in, this is something special. Like, it's not the 90s anymore, they shouldn't be throwing out old tritium dials, but still, it happens. And you have to assume that if you send a watch for factory service with something they consider a service replacement part, a tritium dial, that it's going to come back with superluminova, probably superluminova hands too. So yes, Panerai will service it. That's a rare case of a modern Panerai that should be serviced with a vintage specialist for specifically that reason. There was another question that came in that I wanted to address, because I think we're pretty open about all questions, but I think someone probably took a cue from Niko's wardrobe and asked, Jay Sykes, is Watch You Want a Christian company? We are non-denominational. We are also open to whatever individual members of the team believe.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question, I guess, based on the fact that I'm wearing my cross. Obviously I don't go around talking about it every day. We're very professional here, but I very much appreciate being in a workplace that appreciates my my life. So,
and I have a monument to Cthulhu right back there behind the camera.
There
All
you
right.
go.
So this is a question also coming in. Will the maxi case infect more models? This is Rolex with big old cases. Niko, at this point, do we just assume that that case is going to find its way into every single Rolex product, short of maybe the ladies' watches?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably guess so. It's not my favorite thing that I've seen happen, but I don't see it stopping anytime soon either.
Here's the weird thing about the maxi case. It's Rolex's way of saying we haven't really changed the size of the watch, with the exception of, I would say, the Explorer 2 being the one outlier. The sub didn't become bigger than 40 millimeters on paper. It's still 40. But you put a 6-digit sub next to a 5-digit sub, and it's like parking an F-14 next to an F-18. You almost feel like you could land the F-18 on the F-14.
Yeah.
So they increased every dimension except that one diagonal where you could get a 40 millimeter measurement. I don't know. Honestly, the one holdout seems to be the Daytona, and to a lesser extent the Yachtmaster, definitely not the Yachtmaster 2. I believe that the taste for bigger watches is robust, and everything that's gone to the Super Case will stay that way, but I do hope that the Yachtmaster and the Daytona hold out, because certainly in the case of the Daytona, there is no flagging demand for that particular model.
Yeah.
In the size it is.
Totally agreed.
Okay, so I do get a shout out. Cthulhu all hail. Cthulhu madness spreading through the net. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to give a shout out to my producer, Faylene Jerome, who has kept me on topic and on time. We plan to do an hour tonight, and that is exactly what we will do. Remember, subscribe to our channel if you enjoy these broadcasts. Niko's phone number and email have been on the Chiron display at the lower, well, you can see how old I am, I'm saying Chiron. The graphical display on the lower third of the screen. Feel free to reach out to him for any watch you see on our website. Also, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We're doing our best to be social media butterflies, so we're active on all fronts. Thanks for everything, guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Remember, the questions that you have for me do not disappear at the end of the broadcast. We're back with Monday Mailbag featuring a collector, a noted collector, and a local friend of ours, but we're both going to be taking your questions, so save them for that show. Until then, I'm Tim, he's Niko, she's Faylene, and thanks for logging on.